Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And good morning to everyone on this amazingly spring day. In terms of introductions, I'm Julie. I'm the founder of Apuri Solutions, which is a HR consultancy and coaching service. I'm a chartered fellow for the CIPD and also an accredited coach. So I work with small and medium-sized businesses who are seeking to outsource their HR or need a bit of extra support. And in terms of the HR support that I offer, it's anything from day-to-day to strategic. But for me, it's about providing people solutions. And as a leadership coach, I work to empower individuals and teams so that they can achieve their goals using a variety of methods, including NLP and motivational analysis. So as Christina said, for me, it's about empowering and enabling businesses and individuals to achieve what it is that they're wanting to achieve, whether that's through HR or through coaching. Christina, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, sure. So again, good morning, everybody. So I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, which is a multi-award winning GDPR or data protection consultancy. I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses, including charities, and I really like to work with them because I love to see them thrive. So that's why I sort of gravitate towards them. I tend to have a hands-on practical approach with my client, and I tailored the solution in proportionate to their size and complexity. And so I help my clients navigate the intricacy of GDPR because it's not black and white, it's a variety of shades of grey. And I do that primarily by educating them on the regulation and how to apply it to their environment, because knowledge is power. That also then in turn enables them to operate with a high-performing culture, which then fuels their business growth. So for me, it's all about educating, empowering, and enabling. So let's start from the beginning. So when an employer is onboarding a new employee, it is legally required to carry out certain steps. Would you like us to walk through those steps, please, Julie?
Yeah, of course. And I think joys of new starters is, depending on the organisation, the requirements of that organisation, whether it be best practice, whether it be legal, whether it be they're in a framework and they've got to meet certain standards, it can all change. I think what we're going to do is focus on the generic areas and then call out if there's anywhere specific that might crop up. But just be mindful that, of course, this can change depending on all of those different requirements. When we're thinking about onboarding new employees, I think one of the most vital things to consider is the right to work, and making sure that employees have that right to work within the UK or within the country that they're working in. Because, of course, you might have the right to work in the UK, but if you're going out to Emirates, for example, if you don't have the right to work, then there's going to be a serious issue there. Same with EU, etc. We've also got right to work, visa checks, making sure that they're appropriate and dealing with immigration specialist, for example. And it could be that to do this, you work with a third party rather than dealing with it all in-house. Because not only do you have to say that, yes, you've seen the right to work, you've also got to make sure that it is an original rather than a fraudulent copy. We've also got things like social media checks. If you work in the finance industry, there might be credit reference checks. If you work in social media areas, again, there might be the social media checks. There might be security checks, depending on the type of role that you have. If you're going to be working around or with vulnerable adults and children, there's going to be different levels of checks. Just as if you're working with government departments, there's going to be higher checks. Organisations will also look to complete the following information, where you've got, again, lots of personal information that's going to be collected. So the P45, or whether there's a P46, which is if the P45's come out of date, the induction, taking copies of relevant qualifications. And again, you might need to do this for best practice, for frameworks, or for proving that that person actually has the right qualifications to do that role. Let alone we've got best practice size of setting up probation plans and setting that person up for success. So throughout all of this, there's so many different areas of data that's coming through. Just getting someone to start with you, let alone the fact we've got reference checks and we're contacting previous employers or friends, depending on how you want to do it. And again, with reference checks, you can choose to go back 2 years, 5 years, to previous employers, X number of previous employers. Again, and that will be dependent on the type of industry you work with to what's best practice in there. So lots and lots of data and steps to follow.
Indeed, indeed. So I just wanted to add here, you mentioned something really interesting, Julie, where you said that sometimes you might need to bring in third parties to do these checks. And so what I wanted to sort of bring to the table is that it's really important to establish the roles in terms of who's the controller and who's the processor. So at first glance, it might lead to the conclusion that the employer is the controller and the third party that is performing this check is the processor. However, in my experience, and I'm not saying that this is the case in every situation, so this is why it's important that you carefully analyze the setup in your situation. The third party is a specialist in this kind of activities, and they tend to follow their own processes. They tend to determine the data that they need to use, where to store it, how to retain it. In some instances, they might actually approach directly the individual, so the new starter. So the employer is kind of outside of the process. They only get a final report, but it's minimum. So in this scenario, the third party would be a controller. So there is a controller-to-controller relationship, and this should be clearly documented in any legal binding agreement between the two parties. So just wanted to add that there. Julie, I suppose it is also important to cover what information is collected for the purpose of these checks and how it is shared internally within in other members of staff, but also externally.
Yeah, completely. I just wondered before I answer that question,
sure,
whether it's worthwhile, and I'm going to challenge you, Christina, because I know it's not straightforward.
Okay.
You suddenly sort of look nervous. Can you give a snippet or an overview of the difference between the controller and the processor? Because people may just need to have that, or this is new lingo I'm trying to get my head around.
No, good point. Okay, so the regulation defines a data controller, or controller for short, as the entity, which could also be a sole trader, that determines the purpose and the means of the data, of how the data is being processed. So in other words, the what and the how and the why, okay, of the data. So why is being collected, for what purpose is being used, how is it being used, etc. Where is it being stored, who is it being shared with, and so on. While instead the data processor, or processor for short, this is the typical outsourcing. So they act on behalf of the controller for a specific process. So the usual example that I give to aid the explanation is, if an organization decides, say, for example, to outsource the payroll to an accountant, the accountant, for the purpose of the payroll process, is the processor, because they're acting on behalf of the controller, the employer in this case. And so in order for the processor to carry out that process, the controller, who is the employer, will need to share with them some personal data of the employees, like names, bank details, salaries, national insurance, pension contribution, absences, holiday sicknesses, etc., etc. And the accountant can only use that data for the purpose of that process, nothing else. So that's the distinction between the two. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much. And I think it just shows how complex and how much extra you need to think about the data and who's accessing it and how it's working when we're thinking about this, because we're just thinking about onboarding someone.
Yes.
But all of a sudden we're starting to think about the roles and the requirements of who's got the data, why have they got the data, etc. So going back to that, the question you asked, Christina, in terms of what information is collated and where it goes, whether it's internal or external, it's really, again, it's going to be really dependent on the size of the business and if they outsource their requirements. For example, you may have a large organization that has payroll in-house and HR in-house, but we may have smaller businesses that actually push all of that externally to consultants and other businesses to process. But when we're thinking about the types of data, we've got personal details. So think about the data that your organization has collated for you. You've got your address, your national insurance number, your phone numbers. It could even have your social media. I'm going to say social media tags. I'm not sure that's correct, but the addresses that you have. In my brain, they're tags, but who knows? I could just be showing my age, couldn't I? But also, not only do we have that information, you've got your bank account details, you've got emergency contacts, next of kin, and their personal details. Because there's no point in just giving a name of someone. And of course, giving a name of someone is sharing personal data, because it's one part of the identity. But then also you've got mobile numbers, you might have address details, you might have disability information, impairments. If there are payments that need to go out to certain government bodies as part of your payroll deductions, the organisation will hold that information. So all of that is dependent on, all of that information is held by the organisation, but also it can be held externally depending on the setup of the business. We've also got to include in there your auto enrolments, your pension information, apprenticeship levies, anything like that. So lots and lots of data suddenly is being collated and dispersed depending on how the business is set up to different places. But all of this information is requested for incredibly valid reasons. For example, if they don't have your bank account, well, they just simply can't pay you.
Yeah.
So you can request to be deleted, which is great, but then no one can pay you. So there's no point in that. But we need to think about the impact of the data, and if it's not stored or processed correctly, what can happen? Of course, that can have massive ramifications on the individual themselves if there's a data breach, their engagement or their experience with their employer, especially if they're a new employer and suddenly their data has been leaked or shared with someone, but also the business itself and the business's brand. We're all aware of where data has unfortunately been leaked into public arenas for organizations, and it makes you question, actually, do you want to share your data with them? Do you trust them as a customer? Would you want to go and work for them, etc.? So we've also got on top of all of this information, as I said previously, that employees are usually asked to provide a copy of the original of their passport, so it could be copied, for the right to work. So even that information is going to be stored. When we're thinking about who sees that information, it could be the manager, it could be HR, payroll, it could be finance, it could be an outsourced body. Now, one of the main things that I always get quite worried about is when you've got a new employee, who takes that information from them? Because I've certainly had it in the past where I've worked, we've had remote offices, having you start work in a remote office, the manager collates all that information, which is great because it's helpful, it takes an action off HR. But if they photocopy all of that information and then they put that photocopy of all of that personal information, let's say in their rucksack, their briefcase, it gets shoved at the bottom, forgotten about, it's not being processed properly. Or what happens if that rucksack gets left on a train? You've suddenly got a massive issue when you're just following a process and someone has just, and I'm going to do the air marking, but just photocopied some ID to get it in. So there's lots and lots of things that we need to consider and risks potentially. So an awful lot to think about, don't you think?
Yes. And so that actually brings me to sharing the data. So, when you're sharing data or collecting data, it's really important to tread with caution. So you think of your processes. So the one that you've just sort of highlighted, the manager collects the data, takes photocopies, and then puts them in their rucksack. It's the sign of a manual process, not very robust. Mm-hmm. And also it demonstrates a lack of data protection awareness. So it's really, really important that you look at your processes. And so maybe instead of photocopying, it could be scanning the document, and then so that it goes straight into an electronic filing system. So the risk of the document in the rucksack going missing, it's reduced. But also think of, so when you are sharing data internally in particular, if you can, avoid using emails simply because you could be sending the email to the wrong individual. We've all done it because you've got the auto predict or whatever it's called that predicts the email address. So perhaps use a sharing platform like, I don't know, SharePoint or Google Drive or whatever else that you have, so that not only you avoid someone else that is not supposed to receiving the data, but they also provide you with access rights that can be restricted. And so that only those that are authorized to access the data, they're the only one that can do that. And also because access should be role-based rather. If you're sharing the data externally with third parties, is it possible for them to have access to the shared environment, just to a particular folder, for example? So again, explore that. If not, and email is the only option to share data, then make sure, A, that you check and double check that you're sending it to the right address. Number one. Number two, protect the file or document with a password, and then set the password to the recipient in a different, by a different mechanism or in a separate email, without entitling the email passwords. Also, I would also recommend that the email is encrypted. Just wanted to add that to that, Julie.
Yeah, I think there's such important points there. I still receive emails saying password, or the password is password. And think about the types of fun that you can have with passwords. So one of the places I used to work, I actually used to use Spotify and look at different albums that were top 10s, and they would be my passwords for different information going out and things like that, so that you're regularly keeping it refreshed and up to date, because it's so easy for us to go, oh, we'll just use the same password.
Yes.
It will be okay. And that's fine-ish until it all goes wrong. And then it really is not okay.
I just wanted to remind our audience to please click the follow button to avoid missing any future episodes. If you would like to get in touch with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for CVG Solutions. Alternatively, you can email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk.